We like to make plans for our lives, don't we? Everybody likes to make a plan, all of us. There's absolutely nothing wrong with making the plans we make. But what happens when those plans fall apart? Like disintegrate completely. What happens when things don't go according to the plans we have made? We can feel rudderless, lost. Questions about our faith can arise when things fall apart and don't go how we think they should go. In 1999, so I know this is a minute ago, 1999 in August, I joined the Army Reserves. Corey and I had been married for a couple of years, and over that short time, I felt called to ministry, and that developed into feeling a call to full-time active duty chaplaincy in the Army. I needed to finish my undergraduate degree before I could enter seminary and apply to be a chaplain candidate, so I joined as an enlisted soldier. I went to boot camp and did all the, I know it's hard to imagine, but I did it. We both felt that it would make me a better officer and a better chaplain if I were an enlisted soldier first. And also, it would give me some money to finish school so I could get to that plan. Went off to basic training, went off to AIT to train for my job, reported for drill at my Army Reserve unit. Everything was going along right as I had planned. No bumps in the road. I was slowly working toward my goal, and things were totally fine. What happens with best laid plans, right? As my plans were just ticking away, I learned I had cancer. Everything changed. My career was over before it began. I was absolutely devastated. I was considered a non-deployable asset, and in post 9/11 military, that meant getting out of the Army. I was so lost after that. Besides all of the emotional responses to actually having cancer and the treatment and the recovery, I felt like I had lost my purpose in life. I had to mourn what I had planned in my life before I could move on to figure out what was next. And that was a painful process. I vigorously questioned my call, my faith. I was angry with God. I questioned my value and my place in the world. And even now, after a couple of years have gone by, it still feels like unfinished business, like there's a piece of me that was not allowed to be completed. We could say that disappointment and grief are just part of life, right? We've all been there. Marriages end in divorce. Careers don't go according to plan. Fractured relationships develop between families, parents and kids and siblings. Death and loss and grief can profoundly alter our life and what we thought life was going to look like. And there are lots of other smaller things that come into play that make us change whatever plans we thought we had. Life in general can be difficult. And when our most cherished plans don't come to pass for one reason or another, it's hard to move through those moments. When what we've worked for, what we've sacrificed for, doesn't happen like it's supposed to. We question everything, including our faith. And we question, where can we find hope in that broken dream? Something about the biblical text that is so heartbreakingly beautiful, right? It's how folks deal with life not going according to plan. Story after story after story is about things falling apart. And what do people do with those pieces? These people that we read about, that we attribute, that we see as giants in the faith, they too have to struggle their way through. They too have to find a way to cope when things aren't as they should have been. In Matthew 11 this morning, now when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and proclaim his message in their cities. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered him, "Go and tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those with the skin disease are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you do? What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal places. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one for whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I tell you, among those born of a woman, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist, yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." Let's talk about John for just a minute. He is the son of the elderly Zechariah and Elizabeth. If you were here last week, we talked a little bit about them. Zechariah was the one who was in the temple, who was a priest in the temple, and had an encounter with an angel, learning that well past their childbearing years, they were gonna have a son. I wonder what it would be like to be raised with that knowledge. To be raised with the knowledge that you were the result of a miracle. I mean, we all are, but this is a little bit above that. How many hopes and dreams must have been piled up on him that he had to navigate through his entire life? The weight of that must have been immense. I mean, we go to Corey's parents' house every Thanksgiving and we hear all about the snowstorm that happened when he was born. For a few years, 50 plus years, we've heard that story repeated. You all do the same in your families. Talk about your kids and how they came to be and tell them the story over and over. What it must have been like for John to hear that story every year upon his birth. He was kind of a cousin of Jesus. Elizabeth and Mary were probably related somehow. Mary had sought the safety of Elizabeth's home when she learned she was pregnant. So the story of John and Jesus are interwoven before even their birth. We see in the biblical text a couple of interactions they have as grown men. You might remember that John was the one who baptized Jesus, signifying the start of Jesus' ministry. And now in our text, they communicate when John is in prison. Now we can imagine there were other interactions of the two of them growing up, and they were quite familiar with one another. Probably the text doesn't show that, but there is an implication of a deep relationship between the two men in the interactions we see at Jesus' baptism, in this text of John in prison, and Jesus' profound grief when John is killed during his imprisonment. Now that's skipping ahead a little bit, but this moment here shows an interaction of two men who are incredibly close. And it also shows that John is feeling the stress and the grief and the doubt and the pain and the fear that comes along in his imprisonment. John has got to know. He is fully familiar with the despotism of Herod and his crew. He has got to know at the end of this imprisonment is not life, but death. He has pushed up, he has made it his purpose to push up against Herod and just push all of Herod's buttons, calling out political and social injustice. And John is not one to mince words about those things. He is a tough and courageous man, but even folks who have immense strength have moments of fear and moments of doubt. And that's what we see. He's having doubts. He's afraid. He's questioning everything. And so he sends this message to Jesus. Are you the one? Can you hear all the emotion behind that question? Are you the one? He needs reassurance. His faith is faltering. He's sitting in his cell in deep despair. And all of the ministry, the message, the risks he took, where did it all go wrong? A life that began with such promise, with such hope, now ends in a prison cell? Does he wonder? Does he look around? Does he raise his hands and say, has it been worth this? Has it been worth this? We can't judge him for that. It's not a moment of weakness. It's a moment of profound suffering. It's a moment when hope looks like it has not just faded away, but has run from him. Hope has abandoned him when he needed it most. And Jesus is so compassionate and so gentle in his response to John. He too must know that John is not going to make it out alive. What can he possibly say to give comfort to him now? He affirms his call and the value of his life by not sending platitudes, but honesty. And in that honesty, hope flickers. Jesus responds, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those with skin disease are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. In this response, Jesus gently reminds John that in a broken world, God is still at work. In disappointment, in fear, in grief, in the brokenness of political and social systems that encourage abuse and inhumanity, in the heartbreak of relationships gone sour, in the unfairness of disease, in the injustice of poverty, and the greed that creates such, God is still at work. When hope fades and is nearly impossible to see, God is still at work. When we and our faith hit rock bottom and we don't think anything can make us despair more than we are in that moment, and it is the worst it has ever been, God is still at work. We're reminded by another pastor this week that hope in the gospel is not grounded in outcomes or visible success. Hope is rooted in perception, in trusting God is still at work, even when systems remain unchanged, even when prophets die behind bars, and John's question echoes across the generations, are you the one? Yes, Jesus says, yes. God's dream for us is not complete. It is still unfolding. It is still at work in the darkness, in the fear, in the brokenness. It is still at work. God's dream for you is still unfolding. Sometimes we don't see everything. We just look at the moment we're in. Sometimes it can be really hard to look past it, but God is still there. The same pastor also wrote that Jesus affirms John not in spite of his question, but through it. Jesus doesn't see John's crumbling hope as a failure. He needs it as part of what makes John faithful. This is a pastoral word for us. Hope that trembles is still hope. Hope that trembles is still hope. John is still a prophet. Even in fear, he is still beloved. Last week I said in times of distress and grief and fear, hope is a practiced skill. And what we can be reminded of now, today, is that hope is also gritty and resilient. Hope that trembles is still hope. The thing about faith, the wonderful thing about faith is that we don't have to pretend to have something that we don't. We don't have to pretend that it looks some kind of way. Faith isn't about being the best at something. It's not about winning some kind of race. It's not about comparing ourselves to what other people have. Faith is plodding along day in and day out, coping with what's right in front of us, somehow hanging on by our fingernails, somehow finding peace in the knowledge that God is still at work in our lives, even when everything swirling around us is far from peaceful. Hope is found in the assurance that God is with us always, trusting that in whatever is happening, God is at work in our lives, even if we can't see it or hear it. Because a hope that trembles is still hope. Friends, God is at work in your life today, and that is the word of hope we all need in this moment. Amen. I invite you to pray with me this morning. Oh God of starlight, there are days when beauty catches us by surprise. There are days when joy bubbles up inside us, when hope grows wings and soars beyond us, when love is so big and so real that it is all we can see. There are days when all seems right in the world, but not every day. There are other days, God, when, like John the Baptist, we find ourselves wondering where we could possibly go from here. We find ourselves wondering if we really make any kind of difference at all, or if it's all been a lost cause all along. You know the kind of days we speak of, God. We lament days with ambulance sirens and phone calls from doctors, and days of loneliness and haunting news reports, days spent at the cemetery or in jail. Days when suffering and injustice of the world feels close. There are many days, God, when our hope just runs dry. When the weight of the world presses in on us, when injustice and suffering feel like the only narrative, when hope begins to slip through our hands, oh God, run toward us. Run toward us. Remind us that birds sing in the morning, that flowers push through thawing ground. Remind us of groups of people that have always made a difference in the work that this church has done. Remind us of the work of our hands and the love our heart already knows. And as you do, we continue to remind each other of your presence in our world. And we continue to tell each other the stories of the hungry being fed and the sick being healed and the captives being released and the lion laying with the lamb. And until that promised day, God, we continue to pray, trusting in the hope and peace that you bring. Amen.